In one of our most recent videos, we discussed a megaproject spearheaded by China that ran a likely risk of disaster due to the threat posed by it in part by the unstoppable force of nature. Amidst the islands to which it lays claims in the South China Sea, China has been dredging and building man-made seabed platforms intended to fit its economic and strategic objectives. Those islands, however, are crummy. They're built on shaky foundations and they're vulnerable to submersion by unruly elements of the sea as well as climate change. But it seems that China has responded to these challenges with the following outlook. It may be impossible to overcome nature, but we're gonna try anyway. Look, China is a vast country with rich natural resources, bountiful terrain, and loads of other natural features. However, given its vast size, some of its territory is decidedly less hospitable for human habitation than others. Despite this, as most people know, China has a huge population, and due to routine state-driven reconfiguration of its population centers, many people live in areas not well serviced by necessities such as water and fertile plots of land. And while the south of China is relatively rich in both, the arid north is subject to desertification, where difficult conditions come at a cost to both the livelihoods and living standards of the population. This has led to deaths by drought in the past, and the shortage of water supply even risks upending some of China's major industries, which rely on a consistent supply of hydroelectricity for their continued operation. So, China decided to remedy this problem by creating a complex network of artificial waterworks, effectively saying, to hell with it, let's provide a new river to remedy all of these problems. But, as with other Chinese megaprojects, playing with Mother Nature could be a bit of a dangerous tactic, so let's explore. A lot of China's 20th century history was punctuated by drastic economic changes intended to transform the country from an agrarian society into an industrialized socialist powerhouse. However, it did so at a catastrophic cost to human life, not to mention one of the worst famines in history. The Great Leap Forward was a testament to this. Spearheaded by its leader, Chairman Mao, the initiative sought to transform Chinese society entirely in the 1950s and 60s. In order to consolidate and reorganize its vast population, the PRC developed intense methods of industrialization focused on exploiting China's huge manpower rather than making use of modern machines and capital expenditure. The plan, as it was hoped, was to circumnavigate the slow process of industrialization by exploiting this giant labor force instead. The Great Leap Forward was therefore epitomized by experimental ideas like the development of small backyard steel furnaces in every village and urban neighborhood to allow workers to individually accelerate the industrialization process. It also featured a commune system where peasants were organized into teams with kitchens set up so that women could be freed also to work. China's demographic centers were transformed, with laborers moved from farms to coalfaces at the government's insistence, and population centers exploding in urban areas across China. But the Great Leap Forward was anything but a success. Through the mass nationalization of arable lands, many agriculturalists lost everything, and much livestock was lost to slaughter and disillusioned peasants whose entire livelihood was now in the hands of the government. It resulted in a sharp contraction of the Chinese economy and millions of deaths by starvation, execution, torture, forced labor, and suicide. Other elements that worked against the plan were a series of natural disasters and the withdrawal of Soviet support. Consecutive years of natural calamities accelerated what quickly turned into a national calamity. In only 3 years, at the height of the plan, around 20 million people are thought to have died of starvation, and all told, it's likely that between 30 to 45 million Chinese lives were lost due to all of the consequences resulting from the implementation of the plan. It remains the single largest non-wartime loss of human life in history. But with the PRC being the PRC, the objective was seen as having been fulfilled, and the chaotic rearrangement of the lives of China's population was greenlit for the future. The Great Leap Forward was followed up by a new experimental measure which began in the 1960s, known as the Up to the Mountains and Down to the Countryside movement. The aim of this campaign was to redress the lopsided saturation of workers in the overburdened Chinese cities by forcing people raised in the cities to relocate to rural areas, supposedly to experience life with the peasantry and to discard their bourgeois ideas. More than 16 million young Chinese were moved to mountain regions, frontier towns, and collective farmlands. Most of them were recent graduates from high school, and many were political undesirables, such as members of the Red Guard youth movement, which Mao had started at schools and universities only a few years before and quickly gotten tired of. Most of these remained in their unexpected new homes for the rest of their lives, leading to the generation being referred to as China's stolen generation. And well, this all leads us to today. The idea of just inventing a water project to service the arid regions of China's north and northeast also actually originated with Mao, first proposed in 1952. Perhaps because of the destructive legacy of the Great Leap Forward, the project did take a bit of time, some 50 years, to be put into action. But it did eventually begin in 2002 and adopted the title of the South-North Water Transfer Project. As mentioned before, China's southern regions are relatively well irrigated and have no great shortage of water. This is also where the majority of China's population lives. You may have seen this map before, referred to as the Hu Line. The Hu Line, while imaginary, helps to graph the vast demographic imbalance between the east and southeast of China. Home to 94% of its population, and the remaining hinterland is where the other 6% live. Although drawn up almost 100 years ago, the line largely remains as true today as it did then, as the populations east of the map have dramatically increased since the map was devised by geographer Hu Huangyong in 1935. However, that doesn't mean that nobody lives west of the line. Given China's massive population, 6% of the population still means millions upon millions of people living in its westernmost regions. In part due to campaigns such as the Down to the Countryside movement, large population centers appeared even in isolated regions of the west and southwest, and while still decidedly less than in the east, the population of these areas rose in tandem with the rest of China. Moreover, it stands worthy of mention that some of the regions which are low on water and therefore in need of greater supply are actually located east of Hu Line. As noted by the Wilson Center, one such region is the North China Plain, which is anything but underpopulated and which is home to China's capital city, Beijing. The North China Plain is perfectly fertile, but it's subject to unpredictable weather which can lead to drought. Despite having around 2/3 of China's total cropland and around 40% of its population, northern China only had around 14% of the country's total water supply when the water transfer project got off the ground in 2006. Moreover, due to the nature of the soil there, it requires a lot of irrigation due to its low water productivity. Simply put, more water is needed to create 1 unit of agricultural yield than in the southern regions. High pollution has also contaminated some of the reservoirs, and this means that a consistent supply of fresh water is needed to meet China's industrial objectives. In short, to resolve the great demand for water that eastern China needs and to give western China the water necessary for survival, a solution was needed. And so, it was decided to put Mao's rather mad plan into action to create a complex network of sources that could solve the most pressing water-related issues. Now mostly complete, the South-North Water Transfer Project is a truly monumental undertaking, uniting China's 4 main rivers, the Yangtze, Yellow, Huahe, and Hahe rivers, and redirecting water along 3 canals, the eastern, central, and western routes. The eastern route takes water from the lower reaches of the Yangtze River by canal to the North China Plain, including the provinces of Jiangsu, Anhui, and Shandong, and the major city of Tianjin. The volume of water provided is intended to meet the needs of agricultural and industrial sectors in all of these areas. In addition, the extra water flowing through the canal will make it navigable throughout the year, providing further benefit to the economic activity of the northern region. The central route carries water from a reservoir on the Han River in the center of China to several nearby regions, Hubei, Henan, and Hebei. This is, by some margin, the most crucial of the 3 routes, as its water flow will serve by far the most people at 2 of China's most major cities, Beijing and Tianjin. The route has been designed so that water will move from its source to its endpoint by gravity alone, although a major engineering challenge facing the project has been to increase the storage capacity and height of the Danjiangkou Dam from its original 157 meters to 170. And in a striking display of China's engineering muscle, the eastern and central routes run by tunnel directly under the Yellow River. Both projects are now largely complete, with the eastern route's water flow reaching Tianjin on China's eastern coast in 2017, and the central route having been largely finished, with the exception of several planned expansions 3 years earlier in 2014. But it is the western route which is perhaps the most ambitious and the least well-defined. Its intention is to provide much-needed waterworks to China's relatively underpopulated regions in the northwest, including Xinjiang and Qinghai. The project involves sending flows of water around 500 kilometers from the Qinghai Tibet Plateau in the south over a mountain range known as Bangkala. It is simultaneously intended to help replenish the Yellow River, which in turn is used for the eastern route, and to provide not only irrigation for millions of hectares of arable land in western China, but also to meet the demands of urban, industrial, and energy development in the region. The thing is, this project is by far the bumpiest, and it's not really clear how any of this is going to be accomplished without at least a massive cost to the ecology of the affected regions, as well as to China's foreign relations, as we shall see a little bit later. Now, admittedly, the South-North Water Transfer Project has, for the most part, been a general success, and no major environmental disasters have been reported yet. Certainly, there have not been reports of a failure comparable with other Chinese projects which sought to fly in the face of nature with little regard for the environment or population safety. But that doesn't mean it's come without any problems. For one thing, the 3-route project has come with a huge bill, $62 billion. This makes the project twice as expensive as the Three Gorges Dam, although given the scale of the objective, this is actually pretty understandable. Certainly, it seems money better spent than the suspected $13 billion that China threw at just one of its struggling man-made islands in the South China Sea. But even so, there is a risk that if the project doesn't meet its objectives in full, this will have been a hefty chunk of money down the drain, in this case quite literally. And since the canal has been in part financed by local administrations in the region they service, some local officials have balked at the steep cost to regional coffers and have even argued for compensation because of the ecological services they need to implement for the canals to function. The Hubei region, site of the dam responsible for the water for the central route, is likely to see its revenues diminish significantly, since the decreased water flow it can benefit from impacts its ability to exploit valuable mineral resources in the region. And all this is not to speak of the roughly 300,000 people from Hubei and surrounding provinces who've had to be displaced by the project, further impacting general economic activity. In addition, the same route carries water from the south to some parts of the north, but while the south has plenty of water, this doesn't necessarily make it very clean water. Schistosomiasis, a disease caused by parasitic worms, remains a significant fear. And although water treatment plants are part of the project's design, some scientists doubt they will be effective in containing this and other waterborne health risks foreseeable in the transfer between regions. But the biggest problem, by some margin, is the heavy environmental impacts likely to result from the project, something which has even resulted in some careful criticism within China itself. The construction process of the canals poses potentially serious harm to the regions in which the canals have been built, through saltwater intrusion and resulting habitat destruction. The project's impact on wetlands also has raised similar concerns, as reduced river flows will slow the deposit of sediments that are critical to wetland formation, meaning that these could become arid and dry. And although the aim of supplying water to some parched areas of China will probably be accomplished, the redirection of water from existing rivers may potentially lead to the same problem arising for populations elsewhere. The Yangtze River, now the source of the Eastern Route Canal, suffered an unprecedented drought in 2022, imperiling the ability of some Chinese cities to maintain power. Even the Yellow River, the main river of northern China, has dried up every year since 1985, something which will only be remedied if the ambitious Western Route does actually come into being. Some other rivers, especially minor tributaries, have already seen their water sources reduced to the extent that they have completely dried up. As many as half of China's 50,000 rivers have disappeared over the past 2 decades, and much of the rest are heavily polluted. This is no doubt coming at great expense to smaller industrial regions and to the flora and fauna in China's countryside. It's also thought by some that the project, even if successful in its early stages, just isn't sustainable. Qi Baoxing, a former Vice Minister of Housing and Urban Rural Development in China, has pointed to high monetary costs of maintenance and spread of pollution through the waterways, which includes some of the most densely packed areas of China's principal northern cities. And in addition, the two completed routes will probably remedy its problem only insofar as China's population doesn't rapidly grow in the near future, as it has done at several points in its history. More people require more crops require more water, and more water means further expansion of the project, and so on. In short, the sustainability of this project to meet the massive water demand for China to keep running could be a key question in years to come. While the eastern and central routes are now, even after many years of work and eye-watering expense, now complete, it is the third route in the west over which a question mark hangs. You see, as we explained in a previous video on this topic, the completed first two routes don't really require that much structural inventiveness. They mostly require sound civil engineering and construction capabilities, as well as the sacrifice of a lot of ecological systems, something which China has proven itself more than willing to do in the past. But unlike the previous two, the third route shall require a very creative structural approach to achieve success, given the massive amount of ground which must be covered by the new waterworks in order to meet its objective. And the western route is far from complete. Much of it hasn't even started construction. And that's partly because the scale of the project is absolutely huge. It makes it a monumental challenge. The focal point of the project is the development of a new artificial river, hilariously to the English-speaking era at least, known as the Red Flag River. The Red Flag River is intended to ferry water towards the isolated region of Xinjiang and other areas of northwest China. This will be accomplished by diverting around 60 billion cubic meters of water per year from the major rivers of the ecologically fragile Qinghai-Tibet Plateau. Despite the double entendre of its name, the Red Flag River Water Transfer Project actually derives its name from a canal in eastern China known as the Red Flag Canal due to a prominent red PRC flag ostentatiously draped over its mouth. The Red Flag Canal was a much celebrated feat of Chinese engineering constructed in the 1960s as a 70-kilometer-long waterway servicing isolated villages in the North China Plain. The project was a success and has been expanded to over 1,500 kilometers in length while continuing to help irrigate the villages and farmlands of the region. Interestingly, the new project, despite its scale, has not received the same level of fanfare as the eastern and central routes of the South-North Water Transfer Project. This may be deliberate. For one thing, there is little guarantee of success with this initiative, and its intended date of completion is still a long time away, being slated for completion in 2050. And when it comes to the Red Flag River project, there are several problems. Not only is its sheer scale, which will involve artificially creating a river to span effectively half of the length of China, but also because of what else that distance will entail. The vast expanse of land in between the source and the destination encompasses practically the full variety of China's very diverse topography, from mountains and plateaus to deserts and basins. At least part of the Red Flag River will have to pass through both the Gobi and Taklamakan deserts, as well as cross the Barnkala Mountains. And given this ruggedness, workers will have to construct much of the project in isolated areas without much nearby infrastructure and without much financial or material support from local administrations. Moreover, once again, the environmental factor is an issue since the source of the Qinghai-Tibet Plateau is an ecological area which is already highly fragile and where any disruption caused by a change in the water supply could be severe. But in addition to those problems, the diplomatic disputes which may arise could be similarly severe. You see, the redirection of water from the plateau will almost certainly reduce the water flow of several rivers which currently rely on it. The trouble is, 3 of these are transnational rivers: the Mekong, which flows from China southwards into Myanmar, Laos, Thailand, Cambodia, and Vietnam, the Salween, which also runs into Thailand and Myanmar, and the Brahmaputra, which flows from the Tibetan Plateau through the Himalayas into India and ultimately Bangladesh. And while the project is likely to come at an ecological cost to each of these rivers, it is the question of the Brahmaputra which raises the most risks of a diplomatic upset. At 3,000 kilometers in length, the Brahmaputra is an important river for irrigation and transportation for India and Bangladesh, and millions of people in both countries are directly dependent on it. India has therefore reacted to any Chinese plans to meddle with the river with great concern, and India's Prime Minister reportedly raised the issue to China's leadership during a visit to Beijing in 2008 after the plans for the western route had been revealed. It appeared, not long after, that China had perhaps relented on this part of the plan, with Premier Wen Jiabao announcing during his visit to India in 2010 that China would take into account downstream interests in their plans for the Brahmaputra basin. However, talks between both nations have not really taken off on the matter since, and the building of the Red Flag River has continued undeterred. China and India have also sparred on other fronts in the time since, especially in contested regions of the Himalayas, where hand-to-hand fighting between Chinese and Indian soldiers resulted in dozens of deaths in 2020 and 2021. What this could mean for international security and the relations between two neighboring powerhouses is something that could lead to uncomfortable questions in the future. A red flag in name, a red flag by nature.